Now, David, thank you so much for that lovely, elegant explanation. Now, are you all baffled? Now, look, don't worry about it. You just get used to quantum theory. And the annoying thing is, every time we test it experimentally, it works, doesn't it? So we've just got to live with it. Now, I'm going to just ask Terry and Stephen a few questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for the last half an hour. But Terry, let me just ask you, when did you first become interested in exploring...
Can I ask one question first?
Yes, sure.
Is the cat okay? I mean, I like cats.
In some branches, the cat has been sacrificed.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
But when did you first get interested in parallel worlds and trying to write something around them?
I think that science fiction writers are rather predatory in this kind of thing. So they see something in nature or new scientists which might actually suggest that something science fictional might just be possible. Zoom, away we go. Mm. And I'd just written a book called
Colour of Magic.
I know, but I was thinking for the next word, the colour. I'd sent it off, and I had another idea about a multiple worlds universe. And I wrote, I think, 2 or 3 or probably 4 short stories based in that universe. It was called the Farmeggers. What is the Farmeggers?
High Meggers.
High Meggers. We've been changing it so much all the time. And that was it, and that's fine. And, if Colour of Magic had not been very successful, I would probably have written it. Because Colour of Magic was very successful, I thought, hang on, this fantasy is really good stuff for me. I'd already done some SF, but this, you know. So I went down from Steve's point of view to the dark side and wrote fantasy.
And this is 25 years ago, wasn't it, or something?
Like that,
yeah. Something like that. Yeah, because you don't write in the door don't write that sort of thing in the diary, you know, and time passes. One day, a few years ago, I opened up a cupboard and there it was, and I thought, you know, there was something in this. I mean, something could be made of this, but I need the help of someone who could say the term quantum without actually laughing. and Steve and I have known each other for many, many years, meeting at conventions and meeting at the home of other people and all kinds of things. So we both, you know, nod and have a drink and all that sort of thing. And I met, well, let's do you mind if Steve picks
No,
up
well,
again?
I wanted to ask you, Steve, because obviously you've got a hard sci-fi background, and yet now you have entered a book where you've got a character introduced. It was a Tibetan motorcycle repairman reincarnated as a Coke machine. Haven't you? It's true. Haven't you betrayed your roots?
That is not actually bearing Lobsang, for it is him of whom I speak, actually was having some fun with Joshua. Because he is now more or less controls the vertical and all the rest of it. I mean, he can sort of make himself felt everywhere.
He may not be a reincarnated motorcycle.
No, that doesn't matter.
No.
I personally think that he is not. But
in terms of this idea, we were at a publisher's dinner party one night, and Terry, as he said, he dug out this old stuff, and he thought the idea was nice. So we started talking about this idea, the parallel worlds, as they are in the book, and they're not quite as you described, the branching multiverse. They are separate worlds. You step sideways one way, it's like our world, but no people. Step another way, a world away, and it's slightly different, still no people. So it's like Earths, but no people in them, except here. So I could see it in one way as a kind of, it's like an imaginative response to the science of this bonkers multiverse stuff. I mean, the quantum physicists are bad enough, but the cosmologists who tell us that there's a whole other kind of multiverse. Don't start the cosmologists. No. The worse than the Jesuits, yeah.
But it is. But when you guys write a book together, I mean, I've done a couple of books with people. It is like getting married for a bit. It's quite serious. How did you carve up, the workload between you so you didn't have spats and it all worked out?
Well, we had spats as we carved up the workload, actually. You see, after this first encounter, we agreed to collaborate, and we thought, well, that's going to be fun if it works. And then we spent about 6 months, I think, playing ideas tennis on the phone by email, kind of spinning out ideas and plot lines. Then I went down to Terry's for a long weekend to get serious, where we tried to work out an outline for the book and storylines and bits we could each do. And that was where the fighting started, really.
I don't actually... we called them the hissy fits. Was it 3? I think... was it one each?
One each and one
shared. But actually, I think it became because it was like cats. Live cats, obviously. Yes. And we're getting into trouble in this. Sort of prowling around each other, seeing, is this bloke going to take advantage of me because, whatever, because it's not the same discipline.
Yeah.
And then I think we certainly sort of realised that both of us liked what the other one did. We're both good at what we did. So we could get in it together. We don't really have to worry about that thing.
But it is difficult, though, because if you're used to working alone, you come up with an idea and you follow it. If you've got to bounce it immediately off the other person,
So, David, do you think there's a parallel universe out there where these two are kind of trying to strangle each other to death or something?
Well, there are photos of that.
Or not.
But also, I've got to say, to move between parallel worlds, you do rely on a potato.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to check, David, could this be like a tuber to other worlds? That was a joke.
Dear me.
He's not even dignifying that question.
I actually came up with that one. I think it was in the stuff I was doing originally. And I wanted it because I think the crystal set is one of the greatest things ever made. And every kid should build a crystal set.
Yeah, so in the book you build a little crystal radio-like thing.
Yeah.
And you step into it.
And when I was a kid, I used to muck around with crystal sets because you could make them punch above their weight if you knew how to do it. And actually, I think there's a schematic of it somewhere, and there is a 555 timer in there. And anyone that's ever played with electronics will know this is one of these nice little gizmos.
This is how you can move around parallel worlds.
Knows that a 555 timer is essential for anything. And in fact, and so I thought, let's take it from there because
I'd like to say about parallel worlds, yes, and you said that the SF writers read New Scientist, for which Roger worked for many years, and he's this great idea of parallel worlds, and we can make something of that. In fact, parallel worlds in fiction were around for the 30s. Narnia in fantasy, magic doors. H.G. Wells, the door in the wall. And I think there's a man who finds a door into another world and then loses it again. And I've got this, and there's some serious SF from about 1930, 1940s, built on the idea. And I've got this fantasy of the hard SF writers, after 50 years of parallel world stories, this guy Everett comes up with this paper in 1957 and go, what? look, man, we were kidding, you know. It's just stories.
And of course, conversely, the fact that this was such a science fictional idea was one of the things that made it quite a slow slog for the physics community to take it seriously.
I mean, he was really attacked, wasn't he, by his peers for, and I think he moved into different fields of study.
Yeah.
But one of the things you touched on was the fact that the parallel worlds in the long Earth tend to be uninhabited.
Yeah.
And that sounds very simple, but to me that was a really interesting idea, because the traditional parallel worlds thing is, it's what if the Nazis had won World War II or something like that. So there's none of that. And it allows you to explore some very big ideas to do with resources and the state of the planet and so on.
And the nature of humanity, in fact.
Yeah. I mean, just talk me through, I mean, was that, because there are a couple of parameters you set, and the thing about iron as well, that you couldn't move iron between parallel worlds. Just talk me through your thinking behind it.
To make it, first of all, this is sort of unforeseen plot circumstances. In other words, I thought they might be necessary, and I don't know yet whether they will be necessary. Or if they were, and then suddenly aren't. That you couldn't go into the long Earth with a gun. Actually, I found out subsequently you can make guns that would really kill you without iron.
Yeah, we didn't want it to be too easy.
We don't want it to be too easy.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the vomiting. There has to be a cost.
Yeah.
And that made us make Joshua a special kind of person. So
a natural stepper, I think.
A natural stepper, and there are, and there are other natural steppers, but they don't realise this. But again, this is not a particularly new thing in science fiction.
No. But you're right, it is about kind of resources, though. It's like, all SF is about the age it's written in, basically. And what are we facing now? A resource-constrained world where the oil's running out, the water's running out in some areas. So what if you could just step aside into a world as rich as it was before humans came along, and again and again and again. So it is about the nature of resource limitations, or the lack of it, on humanity. Do you need to build cities if you can just go out and pick the low-hanging fruit?
Do we all become hunter-gatherers? I mean, we could.
Yeah. You probably do until you need a dentist or
or that's it, exactly.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, there is no scarcity. We've been hammered on the anvil of scarcity of everything, and that's why we fight. That you can keep moving on. There's still more and more and more. So what is now? I mean, humanity is for fighting wars against other humanities, and then it's so. Once all this is stripped away, who are we? What are we supposed to be doing with all this?
And of course, it's so rich in ideas that in fact, when you read it, the thing that irritated me a lot is I could see not one, but many sequels coming after this. So if you get hooked, you're condemned.
Our publishers tell him, right?
How many more are there in the pipeline, do you think?
Well, we're working on book 2 as we speak, aren't we? And I think at least one more seems necessary, wouldn't you say, Terry?
Well, certainly yes. And the one with the second one starts a little while after the end of the first, just to move us to see what happened next, but not too far in the future. I think Steve thinks that sometime there would have to be a very far future one.
Maybe we're discussing it, but maybe.
You want to get the word billions in, you always do.
I think what you said about the sort of richness of the idea, though. Since it's Terry's idea, I can big it up, can't I, without bragging.
But he's a national treasure, remember. It's fine.
But see, interrupting, this is how collaborating is. Thank you. I once did that. He said, I was only breathing. No, I think it's a good SF idea is really simple and you can express it in a phrase.
But we know
But
that an idea is just an idea. Someone comes up with it. Someone else could have come up with that idea.
Yeah, but then it's the implications. If you've got a library full of implications flowing from the idea, which you can quickly think of, then it's a good idea, a rich idea.
And I'm right in thinking because of these rules that you had, there were natural steppers. You couldn't move iron between worlds. That the parallel worlds tended not to be inhabited, but in fact weren't inhabited by other humans and so on, which tells you something quite profound about our specialness.
They not appear to be inhabited.
But I love the idea that from these very defined, simple starting points, you presumably it would be a bit of a bore if you just kept on adding new constraints on the plot lines. It's much more fun to start off with a couple of simple constraints and just seeing how far you can push it.
Although I'd say in a kind of creative process, we didn't start with a set of rules like that. We had to discover them, didn't we? We needed limitations, and then you boil it down.
To make it interesting. If it's just the new Earths turn up, and there they are, and there's nothing else much, but there's other people just like us. It's just another world, just like us.
Maybe there's a sort of a crossover with fantasy there, Terry, where, you'd think in a fantasy you can do anything. In fact, you want internal consistency and rules of some kind to whatever kind of magic you're describing.
Well, I wanted to see what humanity does in a time of absolute plenty for everybody. The piece I think we really enjoyed doing was the guy that's gone to where a long Earth version of Sutter's Mill is. And is digging out...
Which is where the Americans first discovered gold, didn't they?
That's right.
Gold rush.
Well, not discovered gold, but got... I think the term is a shitload of gold. And when he climbs out his hole, there's lots of people with gold in their hands saying, we've got some too. Everyone's got some. Gold is shiny, and we'll always like gold because the monkey in us likes shiny things.
Yeah.
But... and it's probably good for using as a boat anchor. And in the world of long Earth, you can do that.
So this is Terry thinking like a hard SF writer, though. You think about details like the currency and how that kind of stuff works.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that you actually sort of crowdsourced some of the ideas in the book, in that it's set in Madison, or it starts, or rather there's a sort of origin point in Madison, Wisconsin, and that's where you got together at a Discworld convention to go over the ideas. And,
yes.
And how did it work exactly? Did you just invite everyone to pitch in?
Well, not really. We selected Madison for a particular purpose, which we have not revealed. But there is something quite interesting about the vicinity
physically,
of Madison.
But mostly it was because we were going there for the Discworld convention, yes.
I got the impression that you kind of had a session at the convention.
Well, we did,
pitching the ideas around.
Well, we did. We knew we did.
What we did do... Sorry, I think I've been going this one. We found two fans, really wonderful fans. We wanted to know everything about Madison so we could get Madison right.
Yeah.
And people have said to us, why did you actually... you're both English. Why didn't you set it in England? But in that case, it would be English science fiction. But we thought that let's make our centre somewhere in the United States. I want to do some more on this on the second part.
Yeah.
But the second, it's not long ago since there were pioneers.
In America.
And it's still in the folk memory. It's still part of being America. They still think like that. And hell, so many of them have got guns. And so suddenly the fact that there is now an extendable Americas, that's something that, that's all right, let's up sticks again and away we go.
Yeah. That's it, the whole idea.
Whereas England is probably saying, what about the National Health Service? What about my dole money? I don't know. What can I do with Gran?
Yeah, it did feel like a very American kind of idea. the American
also,
frontier myth,
yeah.
which fed into science fiction, of course, you know, the high frontier of space.
You're not angling for the film, you know, the Hollywood movie rights here or something.
Oh, wouldn't be so cynical, no. So we didn't really crowdsource it in that sense,
Nor
but
is
we
the
did.
fact that we have lots and lots of readers there too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But we did do, I do remember we did a huge talk at the American Disco Con. How many people there? A couple of thousand? And so we were working on the book, you know. So we're doing this talk about this book we were in the middle of, which is a kind of strange experience for me. So we got feedback of various kinds from that, but not really crowdsourcing, but bouncing half-formed ideas off people. It was interesting.
There's a beautiful phrase in the book that each of these parallel worlds are a thickness of a thought away. And I'm going to now challenge David. Can you define what the thickness of a thought is between parallel worlds? Has that got no physical meaning at all?
Not the short answer is I can't think of one in this context. I mean, the thing is the worlds are kind of not out there in space in quantum mechanics. It's not like there's an extra spatial dimension. It's a kind of it's more as if in the physics version at least, it's more as if they're kind of all in the same space but not interacting.
Yeah, like harmonics on a string.
Yeah, or like shadow matter. People used to talk about shadow matter at one point. I've lost track of whether cosmology still does. But, you know, it was going to shadow matter interacts with other shadow matter, and ordinary matter interacts with other ordinary matter, but the shadow and the ordinary doesn't interact.
I can listen to this stuff for days.
But I should also ask, I mean, one other just scientific issue is whether you could ever devise an experiment to show that the parallel worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is the correct one. Are we anywhere near doing that at all?
It kind of depends what you mean by it. I mean, go back, if you're always testing this kind of thing against the alternatives. So go back to my alternatives to many worlds, the change the philosophy alternative and the change the physics alternative. You can't test many worlds against the change the philosophy move, because you can't test any theory against the hypothesis that the theory's wrong but things work as if it was right. Like, you know, you can't test the hypothesis that fossils were dead dinosaurs against the hypothesis that fossils weren't dead dinosaurs, but they looked like they were. The change to physics one, where the interference effect, the being in two places at once, goes away because of the physics, that you can test, and you can't. We're not ever going to test it realistically at the level of something as big as the cat, but you can test it for middle-sized system. So that interference thing I had on the board, I was doing it with photons. You can do it with Buckminster fullerene, these kind of 60 carbon atoms things. There's experimental proposals to try doing it with viruses. So if it ever turns out that we do one of these interference experiments and we don't get interference in a situation where the physics predicts we should get interference, then that will be it for many worlds. But so far, quantum mechanics works out pretty good. And while, you know, it's not, I don't think it'll ever get to the level of cats, but no one's ever got rich betting against the ingenuity of experimental physicists. So I wouldn't be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised to be surprised, so to speak.
And just to move back to one of the sort of the scientific implications of the book, Stephen, it does seem to me that you're also saying that humans are very special in a way. I mean, we now, there are so many exoplanets out there. Everyone feels comfortable that there's lots of life in the universe, but we're not so sure whether there's lots of smart life or human-like life in the universe. I mean, just talk me through because you have a very hard sci-fi background. You must have talked with a lot of exoplanet experts about this sort of thing.
Well, yes, it's the Fermi Paradox that you're referring to, I guess, where physicist Fermi in the 1950s said if the sky is full of alien civilizations, why don't we see them? Why don't we hear from them? Why does the universe look empty? Why don't we see the gigantic engineering? Why don't we hear their signals? And I'm involved in SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, the radio astronomers. And they have a committee called the Post-Detection Task Group, which I'm on, who explore the implications of the signal arriving tomorrow. Well, how do we handle it? How would you release the news? How do you handle the cultural impact and stuff? And so on. The answer is nobody knows. But yeah, it's a mystery. But I mean, one solution to the paradox is that maybe races like ours, technological, world-changing species, are rare for one reason or another. I mean, we did come through some bottlenecks in the past. You know, there were I can't remember the dates now, but back in our prehistory, there was times when we were down to like 10,000 people or less, I think.
That's right. I think there's some genome analysis data that suggests a bottleneck.
We're down to it, So some disaster nearly wiped us out a little bit more, and we might not be here at all.
Which we used in the book.
Well, we used in the book, yes. And we, surely we've come close to crisis of our own making, the Cuban Missile Crisis for one, for instance, now the climate crisis we're facing. Maybe we're smart enough to wreck things, but not so much to fix things, and maybe that's why species like ours are rare. And I think that's that's what we've done in the book, really, by having the humans dominate. They're humanoids, so they started from the same place but went in different directions, rather more, I don't want to say in tune with nature, but fitting into nature rather more. Whereas we are the ones who've mushroomed across the planet, for better or worse. Maybe we're an exception.
Can I add a little codicil to this?
Yeah.
The universe might be full of many intelligent civilizations. And that is a very strange and wonderful thing. Or there might be no one else out there. And that itself is a strange and wonderful thing. So you get something strange and wonderful. And it's a decent bet.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to open up the questions of the audience in a couple of minutes, but I wanted just to ask Terry just one more thing, just to make sure I've got this right, because we were talking about how you first got interested in parallel worlds, back in the 80s or something, and I think
earlier than that, yeah.
And I think at that time, I might have even been ringing you up as a rookie technology correspondent on the Daily Telegraph when you were a press officer for the CEGB. I think that was the mid-'86
It was
something.
only a small amount of radiation. You could hardly
I'm sorry I misquoted you. I'm really sorry. At last I've got a chance to apologise. But obviously that's a huge gestation time for a book. And as you said, you had written some sci-fi before that. So was it just that the Discworld series just took over?
I enjoyed doing the Discworld series. I would certainly have enjoyed doing The Long Earth. I wouldn't have done it, I think, as well as it's been done now, so that's a good thing. Maybe it was the right time. The cat danced.
Yeah. There is some multiverse, parallel world stuff in Discworld, isn't there?
Well, to an extent, yes. Yeah. The nice thing is, it's because of my interest that there is some kind of particle physics at Unseen University. Yeah. Elastic string theory, and that's.
But for instance, in Mort, Mort is Death's apprentice, isn't he?
Yeah.
And there's a princess, I think, who's supposed to die, and Mort saves her.
Oh, yes.
And you have parallel histories then colliding, overlapping. So there's a princess who is neither alive nor dead. Never mind a cat.
There we are. Look, much better example.
Yeah,
it's blasted. Can we get rid of the cat, please, David? Well, I think let's open up to the audience. And I think we've got two roving...